those who aren't familiar with Nirvana, they immediately go to Nevermind. It's the go-to. I think In Utero is the go-to. It speaks about a band and about a songwriter who inspired a generation, was obviously going through turmoil, and you can hear it.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, conversations with authors, musicians, and insiders revealing the stories behind classic rock's greatest songs, albums, and artists. I'm Eric Senich. Before we get started, listeners and viewers get 15% off classic rock merchandise at oldglory.com. Just use the code Booked on Rock. Like a Nirvana established 1988 t-shirt and a Nirvana guitar zip black hoodie. That's available right now. The link is in the show notes, or go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. And we are talking Nirvana today. Robert Boyd returns to the podcast. His latest book is titled In Utero and the Final Days of Nirvana. 1 year after Nevermind transformed Nirvana into the biggest band in the world, the group's future was anything but certain. As internal tensions and relentless media scrutiny mounted, the band traveled to rural Minnesota in early 1993 to record In Utero with producer Steve Albini. The result was a raw, uncompromising album that would become Nirvana's final studio release, capturing a band at both the height of its creative powers and the edge of its breaking point. That story is explored in Last Stand. Robert, welcome back to the podcast. Good to see you again.
You as well. Thanks for having me back.
Well, reading the prologue, I got the sense that this is not just a book about an album. It's about a band that's trying to reclaim its identity. Would you say In Utero was Nirvana's attempt to redefine themselves, or do you think they saw it as maybe a last opportunity and maybe knew that the end of the band could be near?
Both. Nevermind blew the band away, blew their fans away, and it was not an album that they felt represented them. So the band decided to go back to basics, which was their first release, Bleach, and their compilation album, Incesticide, and focus on their original goals as a band, not overproduced albums, focus on the material and the meaning of the material, and that's really what In Utero became. Unfortunately, the drama surrounding the band at the time, both in and out of the band, kind of took center stage. And unfortunately, at the time, the album kind of took a back seat.
As I read that opening chapter, which is titled Before the Storm, it struck me that almost every decision Nirvana made before Nevermind, the punk influences, the DIY mindset, even the relentless touring, seemed all rooted in authenticity. Once Nevermind became a phenomenon, was In Utero essentially Kurt Cobain's attempt to reclaim that authenticity?
Absolutely. Like I said, Nevermind was not the album that the band anticipated it would be, particularly Kurt Cobain's desire for the album. In the end, he felt it was overproduced. He even described it after the fact as closer to a Motley Crue record than a Nirvana record. So when the prospect of returning to the studio nearly 2 years after the recording of Nevermind began to fall into place, the band, again, largely Kurt Cobain, they were focused on a particular sound and a particular audience as well.
Chapter 2, From Seattle to Brazil, begins connecting the dots between the end of Nevermind and the birth of In Utero. Nirvana's first instinct wasn't to find another big name producer. It was to go back to Jack and Dino. Tell us about those sessions.
Well, Jack and Dino produced the band's first album, Bleach. It went well at the time. And they had worked with Dino, not just on their first album, but on a previous demo as well. So they had a history together. He understood the band, and the band understood him. And Butch Vig produced Nevermind. They liked Butch, but again, the sound was not the sound they wanted. When they were exploring plans for their third album, what better way to go back to the sound that we wanted as a band than to explore options with Jack and Dino. At the time, and throughout most of his career, Jack Endino was producing albums in Seattle, um, and the band booked a session with Jack in October of '92, and it didn't go well. Kurt Cobain was not focused, and again, the drama within the band, largely attributed to Kurt Cobain, took away from that session. Some material was recorded, but only one of the songs, "Rape Me," had lyrics, so it was not a successful session. They enjoyed Jack Endino, enjoyed his work, but I think it was clear to the band and Endino at that time that they needed to look elsewhere for a producer for their third album.
And then comes Steve Albini. And you do give context to understand why Kurt believed only Steve Albini could help him make the record that he heard in his head. You spend a lot of time explaining Albini's philosophy before Nirvana ever contacts him. They could have worked with virtually anyone after Nevermind. What was it about Albini that convinced Kurt he was the right guy for this album?
Oh yeah, the band had, the phone book when it came to producers. They could have worked with anybody, but Albini exemplified that do-it-yourself ethos that the band, again, largely Kurt Cobain, wanted. They wanted to be viewed in a certain way, but also, and specifically, Albini exemplified a sound. Kurt Cobain had this sound in his head, the Steve Albini sound, since the beginning of Nirvana. Albini had worked with many of Kurt Cobain's many bands that Kurt Cobain idolized. He worked with the Pixies, he worked with the Breeders, the Jesus Lizard, and again, he wanted that sound. And he was pretty hell bent on getting Albini to agree to work with the band.
I loved reading the letters exchanged between Kurt and Steve. They almost read more like two artists discussing ideas than really negotiating a business deal. Albini's response was incredibly detailed. It's almost like he's outlining his entire recording philosophy. And Albini refused royalties. He said, quote, "Pay me like a plumber." He took a flat fee of $100,000, which seems almost unheard of in the music industry. He basically represented everything that Kurt felt he lost after Nevermind: the independence, the authenticity, and that complete artistic freedom. Was hiring Albini as much a symbolic statement for Kurt as it was a musical decision? Because I know he talked about Albini a lot in interviews.
Absolutely. Albini exemplified what Kurt Cobain wanted to be, not to focus on money, to focus on art. And again, when the prospect of recording with Albini became tangible, became possible, he ran with it. The letter that you referenced was a letter that Steve Albini sent to the band after his conversations with Kurt Cobain. He wanted to get his thoughts down for the band so they knew before they entered the studio what they were getting into. Albini had a recording methodology. He had a certain way that he expected bands to act in the studio. And it wasn't anything against Nirvana. It was just he had this universal ideology in the studio. And again, he wasn't going to agree to anything until it was clear the band was all in. That letter is a 4-page letter. It's pretty typical for Steve Albini. He doesn't hold back. And it was largely unseen for 20 years. It was released with a 20th anniversary edition of In Utero in 2013.
Pachyderm Studios, you take us inside that studio where In Utero was actually made. There are some terrific behind the scenes stories here in the book. Do you think In Utero would have been a fundamentally different album if it was recorded in Los Angeles or another conventional studio instead of that, which was a secluded farmhouse in rural Minnesota?
You never know. Kurt Cobain was just so he was not well, essentially. Pachyderm Studios brought the band essentially to the middle of nowhere, and they were able to focus on their music for 2 weeks and ignore everything else. If they recorded anywhere else, I think there would have been so many um, interruptions, both through fans, hangers on, and drugs, unfortunately. So it was actually Albini in his letter to the band. He recommended Pachyderm Studios. He had worked there a few times. Albini primarily worked in Chicago, and he had about a year prior to In Utero being recorded, he had worked at Pachyderm Studios, started working there, and he felt it was a perfect place to get the band away, kind of get back to basics and focus on the music.
That studio is still there, I believe. I spoke to an author maybe a year ago or less that was there.
Yeah, you mentioned a moment ago about the Pachyderm Studios and its unique the unique presentation of the studio. It was built. The residence that's adjacent to the studio was built in the 60s, and a family lived there for 15, 20 years. And the studio was not initially there. Beautiful piece of property in Minnesota. And when the couple who owned the home, when they had both passed, the property and the residence were sold to a group, a local group in the Minnesota area who decided to build a studio adjacent to the main residence and kind of present this all-encompassing environment for bands coming into the area. A very unique environment where band and a few individuals surrounding the band could stay throughout the duration of the session and then just walk 100 feet to the studio each day to work. There was really no need to leave the studio, although staying, cooped up in a house for 2 weeks in the middle of winter, I'm sure became quite a chore.
Yeah, challenging. As for the songs, you trace their origins, how they evolved, and what they reveal about Kurt's mindset. The album opens with Serve the Servants. The lyrics touch on his parents' divorce, fame, and the media. Do you think Serve the Servants is the most autobiographical song that Kurt ever wrote?
It's definitely one of them. I think every song post Bleach had something about his life in there. He infamously would state that his lyrics are just, they have no meaning. I don't think that. I've always thought, that there was a clear underlying story to many of his songs. Not all of them, but most of the songs on In Utero have a clear focus, and most of them are autobiographical. Especially at that point in his life, he had so much to say, but I think he was just kind of mentally and emotionally, he had no other outlets, and his music remained his only way to kind of get his thoughts out there.
Thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Scentless Apprentice. What a job Dave Grohl does on drums here, which the song actually grew from a pattern that he had come up with. It was inspired by Patrick Susskind's novel Perfume, the Story of a Murderer. One of the few songs where Dave and Chris received songwriting credit, which leads to my question. Did that suggest maybe the band was becoming more collaborative at this point? I know you talked about in the book too, it kind of took the pressure off of Kurt.
Yeah, he wanted the help. Again, he was just worn down emotionally and mentally, and his writing had decreased significantly in 92. His output had decreased significantly. and most of the material, some of the material on In Utero, was they were songs written prior to Nevermind. So yes, he wanted the help. He wanted his bandmates to chime in, although he was, he wasn't willing to take anything. Even Sentinel's Apprentice, he at first was he called it I believe the term was a cliche tad riff. Nirvana's peers in the Seattle music scene, Tad, who they had toured with. But he eventually went along with the Grohl's work, and they pieced the song together. It was the only song on In Utero that the group had written as a trio. Every other song Cobain had wrote alone.
There was a song, though, that Grohl wrote that ended up on the deluxe edition, right?
Yes, Marigold Grohl wrote. It had appeared on a cassette that he had of tracks that he had written that appeared on a indie label a few months prior. But he had time at Pachyderm to put down his own material. And an engineer also at Pachyderm at the time, Bob Weston, helped Grohl piece it together. It didn't appear on In Utero's final track mix, but it appeared later on a single and then released on the anniversary editions of In Utero.
You describe Heart-Shaped Box taking shape over months. This is the big standout single. You even mentioned Courtney Love wanting to use the riff herself, but Kurt was having none of that. She heard him playing it in a closet, asked if she could use it, and he looked up and said, "Fuck off."
Yeah, and that's just typical Courtney Love. Like, you'd be surprised if she didn't ask for it. Like, she was trying to piece her own album together, which we would become Live Through This, which is a great album. She didn't need Heart-Shaped Box. She ended up releasing a great album herself. But yeah, Kurt Cobain was piecing Heart-Shaped Box together in his home at the time. From what I have heard, in his closet. She storms in and wants the riff for her album, and he says, "No, I'm not having it." He ended up putting it aside, and then the final instrumentation was put together along with Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic before the final outcome came together.
Going back to the lyrics, so for this one, many interpretations of what the lyrics to Heart-Shaped Box are about. What are the interpretations, and what did Kurt say about it?
And again, there's so many interpretations of Heart-Shaped Box, a cough and death. Courtney Love, he ended up saying that it was attributed to children with cancer, and he the emotional impact that he felt that had on him.
He would talk about, I mean, he's not like the Bob Dylan type who wouldn't say anything at all about his lyrics. He would talk about them.
Absolutely. I think he liked to have some mystique there as well, though. And it has, as the years have gone by, it has served him. Like, people, still debate over what certain songs mean. I mean, obviously, there's some that it's pretty clear what they mean. But yeah, Heart-Shaped Box is probably one of the most debated songs that he ever wrote. Like, what is this song about? And again, from what I had gathered through my research, was that he attributed it to nothing necessarily dark, more sad, and that being the children who suffer with cancer and the impact that topic had on him.
Robert Boyd, the author of Last Stand, In Utero, and the Final Days of Nirvana. Rape Me remains one of Nirvana's most controversial songs. It was almost the album opener. Why do you think so many people misunderstood Kurt's intentions?
Well, rape, I mean, the term itself is, untouchable. People they don't want anything to do with it, understandably so. And but Kurt Cobain, the consummate artist, he was going to tell his story how he wanted to tell it. And that was a song that was written when they were recording Nevermind. So it was around a time that he was mentally he was doing well. He hadn't dove into a lifestyle of chronic drug abuse. So he knew what he wanted to say in those lyrics, and he over time, when asked, and he was asked all the time after In Utero was released, what does this song mean? And he described it as the abuse of the abuser, particularly a rapist, someone who's incarcerated, getting sexually assaulted themselves. As time went on and his struggles with the media began, critics viewed the song as his interpretation of how he was getting critiqued and lambasted by the media. But he always went back to the original interpretation that the song was simply about the abusers getting abused.
It was anti-rape, is what he was saying.
Yes, essentially, yes.
Yeah. I was really interested in the section about Frances Farmer. I found out about her story years later from the song, and then saw a documentary on her, read about her. Kurt read about her in high school. So for those who aren't familiar, who is she and what drew Kurt so strongly to her story? That the actual song title is Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge. Right?
On Seattle.
On Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah. So he had read a book about Frances Farmer in high school titled, I believe, Shadowland. And he was just drawn to Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was an actress in the 30s and 40s who had some mental health issues. And then she was arrested and ultimately placed into a mental health facility where she remained for several years. She would later contend that she was abused, not treated properly, and when she eventually was, when she returned to the community, her career was over. She couldn't return to film or even the stage like she had in the past. And as Kurt's life progressed and he encountered fame and the impact of fame, he felt a kinship in a way with Frances Farmer. Reaching fame and then the media tearing you down. And then in the last year, 18 months of his life, struggling with mental health and trying to come back from that. So he almost had an obsession with Frances Farmer, and he tried to even track down Shadowland, who was a Seattle writer. He even the last days of Kurt Cobain's life, he made efforts to sit down with the author, and unfortunately, it didn't happen. But he clearly had a fascination with the history. And in my opinion, Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle is one of the standout tracks.
Yes, she was very outspoken, and then they accused her of being a communist.
Yes, very outspoken. She didn't hold back, and some of the literature I've read almost painted the picture as her hospitalizations were an effort to silence her. Who knows if that was the case? But she definitely did struggle with some mental health issues. I don't know if it warranted hospitalizations for years on end, but again, that abuse and uncertainty, I think Kurt Cobain gravitated to, and again had a kinship with Frances Farmer.
Born in Seattle. All right, now Dumb is the next track, one of the album's quieter moments, but it may be one of its sharpest lyrical statements. Tell us about this one, Kurt, making an observation of other people here.
Yeah, again, this is a track that was written pre Nevermind. It was one of the oldest tracks written that would appear on Nevermind. I'm sorry, In Utero. Um, really a simple track, and but one of the album's more beautiful tracks, most a standout track essentially. But Kurt Cobain described it simply as the lyrics, simply as people who have simple lives, watching TV, doing nothing more with their lives, and being fine with that. Dumb, essentially. He described them happy but dumb.
Very Ape and Milk It. These songs feel almost like Nirvana trying to push the listeners away from the polished sound of Nevermind. Was Kurt consciously trying to challenge the audience with these songs?
Yeah, it's pretty clear that, and this would be side two of a traditional record or cassette tape. When you flipped that, when you flipped it over and started side two, you were getting hit with what Kurt Cobain wanted. He this is the sound he wanted, and it was the sound that he wanted the band to gravitate towards as they progressed. Both songs somewhat short, but they do not let up, and then they guide you into track 9, Pennyroyal Tea, which I feel is it's my favorite track on the album. I think it's another standout track. It brings you up, Very Ape, Milk It, and then you come down to Perfection.
Yeah, I would go with All Apologies as mine, but Pennyroyal Tea. Yeah, it feels deeply personal, but it's also one of Kurt's most cryptic songs. What do you think he's trying to communicate here?
There's like with most of his writing, he's all over the place, but it is dark. It's autobiographical. The title is a plant that it supposedly induces abortion. It doesn't induce abortion, but he wanted to play with his critics. He wanted to play with the audience, and that title is a perfect way to do it. The track itself references his emotional struggles, his mental health. It's a reflection of his depression, and a depression that I don't think he thought he would ever come out of.
Radio Friendly Unit Shifter, one of the most ironic titles on the album, another that the band considered as an album opener. Was Kurt poking fun at the music industry, or was the joke aimed at the band's own unexpected success after Nevermind? I mean, that Radio Friendly Unit Shifter is basically like the labels would use that term to describe something that would be a good single, a song that would help to sell, to move units, sell albums, sell CDs, cassettes.
Yeah, they were definitely poking fun at themselves, but also at the industry as a whole. The title is a reference to Smells Like Teen Spirit and its takeover of the music industry and the label's desire to manufacture more Nirvanas, more Smells Like Teen Spirits. Another track on side two that is just it's fury, and it is the sound that Kurt Cobain wanted moving forward. Side one is it has almost all, with the exception of Sentinel's Apprentice, radio friendly tracks, and then you get to side two, Sentinel's Apprentice, along with Harry Milk It. It
challenged the fans who were fans of Nirvana simply because of the radio friendly songs.
Absolutely. I think it was Chris Novoselic when they were trying to come up with an album opener, which eventually became Serve the Servants. He advocated for radio friendly unit shifter, and he basically said, let's start the album in a crazy way and scare the crap out of all those mall girls and their parents.
Yeah, and the high school quarterbacks with the leather jacket that he used to say he'd see at concerts that would never talk to him when he was in high school. Tourette's, barely over a minute long, almost completely chaotic. Now, here we go again, right? This is challenging the mainstream listener. The title has generated discussion for years. Did Kurt ever explain why he chose Tourette's, and how should listeners interpret it today?
It's a song that you I challenge anyone to sit there and understand what he's saying. But I think it just spoke to his anger and aggression as a whole, with the world surrounding him, in his way to just angrily put it all out there. But it's another track on side two that just hammers the listener across the head. Tourette's debuted at Reading in '92, and it's an incredible. Reading '92 was one of Nirvana's most famous shows, and Tourette's on that particular night is a standout moment. It just the crowds are already going crazy for the band, and when Tourette's began, nobody heard it before, but it became one of the standout moments of the night.
And All Apologies closes out In Utero, closes the album on a remarkably peaceful note after those tracks. I didn't know it was inspired by the Beatles' Norwegian Wood. That's very cool. Kurt had that song, the Beatles song, on loop while he was composing the song in 1990. That's the kind of stuff you get in this book as well. The song has often been interpreted as an apology to Courtney Love, to Frances, the daughter, or even to his audience. Where do you land on its meaning?
Well, again, it's a song that was written well before Nevermind, and so you can interpret it as an apology to Courtney Love or Frances, because they were part of his life at that point. But in the long run, it's clear that it acts as a swan song to everyone around him, his family, his audience, perfectly. What it truly is about, I guess it's for the man to tell us.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. So the book gets into one of the biggest myths surrounding In Utero, the idea that Steve Albini's version was rejected and the label fixed the album. For years, the story has been that Geffen forced Nirvana to change In Utero. Where does the truth actually lie between the band's own concerns, Steve Albini's philosophy, and the label's expectations?
Almost immediately after the band left the studio, they questioned the outcome. Their label questioned the outcome, and it became clear to everyone that something needed to be done. Even though they loved the results, their uncertainty, along with the uncertainty of those around them, made it clear that there needed to be some changes. So Kurt and Chris approached Steve Albini about remix options, and Albini wasn't having it. He had indicated in his original letter to the band that he was not going to remix songs at the behest of the label, which was exactly what, or partially what this became, the label's desire to step in and kind of get some changes. He didn't want any part of it, and he stuck to his guns, and he eventually handed the masters over so the band could do with what they wanted to. The band did not want to change the entire album. They were happy with the results. They did want some aspects of the album to be changed. They felt the vocals were not right, and then they needed some radio friendly tracks. They knew they had to appease the label somewhat. Even though they wanted to make a certain record, they knew this record had to sell. They needed to sell the record. So and in competing with their previous album, they did not have a standout track like they did on Nevermind. So it became clear that in order to get those tracks ready for MTV, ready for radio, they needed to enlist another producer. Again, not to remix the entire album, but to remix songs that the band felt could be radio friendly, and those became Heart Shaped Box and All Apologies. Scott Litt, who the band were fans of, and had actually considered as an option for Nevermind, agreed to come in and remix Heart Shaped Box and All Apologies. Steve Albini obviously was not happy about this. It created some back and forth within the media, but the results, and I'm sure many fans of the band have done this. You can sit and listen to Albini's original and Litt's original, and the differences are minor. There's a guitar, a solo on the Albini version that is pretty rough, and the band, they were torn about that. Chris Novoselic wanted it completely out. He wanted it reworked. Kurt Cobain, along with Albini, wanted it in. They wanted that anti-establishment sound, which was primarily on the second half of the album. But eventually it was removed and by Lit. And what you hear now on FM radio is the Scott Litt version, along with All Apologies. The All Apologies version, which is on the radio now, is the Scott Litt version.
And Heart Shaped Box.
Heart Shaped Box and All Apologies, Scott Litt remastered. And those are the two tracks that from 93 on that we hear on the video, Heart Shaped Box video, and on FM radio. Those are the Scott Litt versions. But
not on the actual album version that people
not on the album.
Right.
But the album that was released in stores, those are the only two tracks that were remastered. The original, the other 10 tracks appearing on the album are Steve Albini produced tracks, and those were not modified.
The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. And you quote Kurt in the book saying In Utero felt like the last chapter of the band's 3-chord grunge music. What do you think chapter 2 of Nirvana might have sounded like if Kurt had been given that chance to write it?
He was tired of the 3-chord rock, and he was a fan of new wave, and he wanted to gravitate towards that sound, towards a more experimental sound. And he made reference to doing that. And there's a very interesting interview, and I don't think I referenced it in the book, but in December of 93, he's interviewed by MTV, and he's asked that question: what's your hope moving forward? And he said the Beatles went from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Sgt. Pepper, and he envisioned that massive or that significant progression for his own band. Unfortunately, it never got to that, but it was clear he wanted to get away from the sound of the first 3 albums. And I think a hint of what was to come as well would be Unplugged. I think he eventually would have been a solo artist, and play even folk-inspired music.
Yeah, he was also talking about a possible project with Michael Stipe.
Yes, and I think in the weeks and months before his death, that was in the works. They never entered the studio, though.
Man, what that would have sounded like. Yeah, that would have been interesting because all of the copycats would be out there and he wouldn't even be making music that sounded anywhere close to what he created. while all the other bands, like Silverchair and bands like that would be out and he would already be moving on to something else. Yeah. Well, last question. If someone has spent the last 30 years thinking of In Utero simply as the album before Kurt died, what do you hope they'll hear differently after they read your book?
Those who aren't familiar with Nirvana, they immediately go to Nevermind. It's the go-to. I think In Utero is the go-to. It's my personally my favorite album by any band, by Nirvana. It's been my favorite album since the day it was released. It speaks about a band and about a songwriter who inspired a generation, was obviously going through turmoil, and you can hear it. I've listened to that album. I couldn't even begin to estimate how many times, and I'm always getting new things out of it, hearing new sounds, interpreting lyrics differently than I may have the previous week. But if a new fan is interested in Nirvana and exploring their music, I would start with In Utero.
Yeah, the mark of every great piece of art. You can listen to it and hear something different, something you hadn't heard. 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, who knows how you're going to be listening to it then.
Even the tracks that didn't appear on the album, to me, they could easily have appeared on the album and it wouldn't have skipped a beat. Sappy, I Hate Myself and Want to Die. Those are two tracks that I think they're just as they could appear on the album as a 13th and 14th track, and it would not take away from the impact of the album.
Was You're Right, which ended up on their best of, was that from those sessions?
No, that was recorded in their final session in January of '94. That was the only track to come out of that particular session. As during the promotional phase of In Utero, Kurt Cobain was making statements about the band getting away from that sound of the first three records. So that was their first attempt to get in the studio and maybe implement that plan. To me, it's a step in. It clearly was a step towards a new sound, and unfortunately, it was the only song that came out of that session.
Last Stand, In Utero and the Final Days of Nirvana. Release date July 9th. So by the time you're hearing this or watching this video, the book is out. Find it wherever books are sold. You can look for it at your nearest bookstore. You can find your nearest independent bookstore by going to bookedonrock.com. And Robert, people can find you online. You're on Instagram. I know that, right?
Yes, I do have an Instagram account. And it's a reference to the title of my first book about Nirvana, Before the Storm. And I update it regularly with links to my first book and this book, and also past Nirvana moments. So it's just a celebration of the band, but it's also given me the opportunity to kind of get my work out there and hear some things and some good things and maybe some bad things too.
Well, I love this book. This is another great read for Nirvana fans, and I encourage everybody to go out and get Before the Storm if you haven't yet. And Robert, thank you so much. I'll put a link to your Instagram account on the show notes so people can click on that and reach out to you if they'd like. Robert Boyd, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
That's it. It's in the books.